articles. Sputnik 5 was the first COVID vaccine from Russia, and Putin named it that and rushed it out by skipping phase 3 trials, which nobody else had the courage or madness to do. And now Brazil claims that they are not safe, that it contains a replicating cold virus, which is not supposed to be in there. So I don't think anybody knows if Brazil is just wrong or if there really is a defect in the Sputnik vaccine, but it wouldn't be much of a surprise if there was a defect in the Sputnik vaccine. I know that Putin did not take it himself. He did give it to his daughter, I think. Anyway, apparently the chip shortage is so bad there's going to be a shortage of iPads and MacBooks because they can't get enough chips for them. So that's annoying. And Apple is already developing the M2 chip. The M1 chip is their ARM-based processor that is receiving very good reviews. They say it is very fast, consumes very little power. People that get M1s say they are wonderful. And I've been thinking of getting one, but I didn't like the specs. I was hoping that they'd offer a better one pretty soon, and maybe they will, and maybe even with a better chip. So we'll see about that. NASA participated in an exercise, a tabletop sort of exercise where you simulate an asteroid impact. This is a common incident response thing. We'll talk about it tonight, in fact. If you practice a drill, even without turning on any equipment or anything, you just talk about who's going to do what, so that the various managers of various teams understand what their roles are and how to communicate and how to organize their response to a disaster like this. This is considered a very wise idea because there are an awful lot of near-Earth asteroids, and quite a few of them have a chance of hitting the Earth and creating a disaster of some sort. I mean, very unlikely to wipe out the whole Earth, but to create, a disaster like a bomb going off and requiring some response. Cyber Gibbons is a security researcher who posts a lot on Twitter, and there is something called What Three Words, which I've only heard about indirectly, that is a system that replaces latitude and longitude. You have three normal words which specify exactly where you are on the whole world. That's the idea. But something that he's been posting for the last week or so is that the system is defective in that you might have a word like toll and then a word like tolls that just adds the S on it. And so there are two locations that have very similar words, and very often those two locations are in fact near each other. So confusing them could lead to people sending an ambulance to the wrong place or some other kind of disaster. And he has apparently found the mathematical flaw. He figured out how the system works, and he figured out how it assigns these words to it. And he found that they didn't do something sensible like take an MD5 hash of the latitude and longitude. They used some simple algorithm to calculate this word, and it turns out to have a periodicity of 1,713 and so on. And he figured out mathematically what the problem is that leads to this defect in the system, where it is likely to send people to the wrong location. So that's kind of nice. An example of cryptanalysis, where you do a mathematical analysis of a cryptological system and figure out what the flaws are. FreedomFi wants you to buy these routers that will connect to 5G, and then let other people use the router, and then they will supposedly mine cryptocurrency and give you money for letting other people use it. This sounds extremely bogus, like every cryptocurrency thing. But anyway, they are suggesting it, and I think it'll cost you several $100 to buy one. Yeah, between $500 and $5,000. Anyway, we'll see how that works out. And got a few minutes yet. So this is the big thing Apple has done. Apple has decided to block tracking, to block targeted ads. And they've decided to turn it on by default. And if you have the latest version of iOS, you can go in here and you can adjust it. This is called the App Tracking Transparency feature. And of course, what it is Apple punching back at Facebook. And I've heard one analysis that says, in fact, Facebook will probably benefit from this because the smaller companies will have no other way to get tracking data. Facebook has tons of other ways to get data on you, so they can probably work around this, but smaller companies can't. And it will probably, but anyway, it will certainly affect the companies that live off advertising, and Apple is not one of them. So you can control it. So here's a phishing email which imitates a real email from Chase Manhattan so accurately that it sails through the anti-spam defenses. So I don't know how common this is, but they say, Microsoft spam filter assigned a spam confidence level of -1, which means it did not, it was interpreted as safe. So I'm surprised this doesn't happen more often. The thing that surprises me is there's a thing in email where it checks to see the server it came from. And if that server is a reasonable server for that email to come from, and apparently it can pass that test, which is what usually catches them. So anyway, there's a new Linux backdoor, which has been in use for years, apparently. Rota Jakiro, undetected by antivirus engines, even though it was first uploaded in 2018. And so it uses encrypted communication channels with AES and a couple other methods which are really unimportant compared to AES. And apparently it took a long time for anybody to catch it. So there may be some large number of infected Linux servers out there. This was interesting. This is the number of people receiving the dose. I thought there was a better one. Yeah, this is the one. The daily vaccination rates in different age groups. So here, for example, 75 plus, that's the people that got it first. And as you can see, they got it right away, and then they sort of smoothly decline. And the next group, 65 to 74, got it, and then it declines. But all the other groups suddenly stopped taking the vaccine when they had the Johnson & Johnson pause. There was a then they blocked, the CDC stopped putting out Johnson & Johnson in America for about 10 days, and there was a big argument. Some people saying this will encourage vaccine hesitancy, and other people saying, well, it should just encourage people to trust the vaccines more to see how careful we are with them. But the numbers would seem to indicate that the first scenario is the one that happened. That bad press caused a bunch of people to just not bother getting the vaccine, and so our rate of vaccination is going down already. So, I think we've got more than half the adults vaccinated in America. Oh, you don't think it's? I don't think it's correlation versus causation, but you could say that. But look how they all go down right after this date, and these ones logically should have still been going up. But of course, that's the problem with this sort of thing. You can't repeat the experiment. But I think this looks pretty convincing to me. This is the shape I would expect. You make the vaccine available to a group of people, and a bunch of them take it, and it takes about a month for you to get them, and then it gradually declines. But these rises are suddenly nipped in the bud. So anyway, as a lot of people have said, we're probably in trouble in America because too many people are not going to take the vaccine, and nobody really seems to have any idea what to do about it. I think we're just stuck with that. Anyway, there's something else I forgot to announce in my previous class, and I should announce here. A lot of you people gave very good talks. And so that reminded me, if anybody has nothing better to do, you might want to come do research with us. We don't have money to offer you, though, and I think a lot of the students in this class already have jobs and probably have something better to do. But yeah, India's in trouble, and by extension we are, I have to agree. India and Brazil, those states with a huge amount of COVID going around are, of course, going to end up resulting in mutants and affecting everybody. So yeah, it's you're right. We're in trouble even if we could get the vaccine to everyone in America. It wouldn't mean we're totally in the clear. Anyway, if anybody wants to work with us, three of us, me, Irvin, and Elizabeth, are going to oversee students doing research. We have some suggested topics. Any topic is good, but the idea that you could write a paper, you could do a lightning talk like you did in this class on our podcast. Maybe you could present it to a conference like Pacific Hackers or B-Sides or something. And, the idea is this is a way you might be able to contribute something to the security community and get your name out there. This is how we can't offer you a PhD, unfortunately. because we're only a 2-year college, but that's what we're thinking of here. You know, a research project good enough to give a talk at a conference is one way to begin building a reputation in the field. So I mention it here if any of you are interested, but I think you folks might be already too busy. I'm not sure. Anyway, I wanted to make sure and mention it for anybody that watches this. Let us know. Contact us on Twitter. How about $100,000? That would be fine. You got one? Yep. Yeah, if you're interested, great. Contact me on Twitter. Take a look at the list. And there's no reason. Think of a topic. And feel free to suggest more topics. I just put whatever I could think of to get people started. Technical or non-technical topics, just like the talk you gave here. Yeah, contact me. Let's see what we can do. Because I think we have a lot of people that would like to do things, and it'd be great if we started presenting more talks at conferences and such. I think it would be beneficial. All right, so here we are. This is CISSP, and we're down to the next to last chapter, which is 7. So let's do that. We already did the first bit of chapter 7 last time, so we got 4 sections to do today, which will be better. Good. I see several people interested. I'm glad to hear it. Think of a topic, contact me on Twitter, and we'll work it out. All right. So we got operational preventive detective controls. These are preventive and detective are two things I tend to think of as differently. But anyway, controls that will, some of these are preventive and some are detective. An IDS is detective. It monitors network traffic and informs you if it finds something nasty but doesn't stop it. An IPS blocks malicious actions, like a firewall, and you can put them on the network to protect the whole network, or you can put them on just one host so they have more information about that host, like access to the local logs, and then they can protect that one host better, like Tripwire. So here's an IDS. You have the internet going through the firewall into your trusted devices, and then you take a copy of the data here and examine it, and it will tell you if there was something bad in there without stopping it. Or you can put it here, where the traffic comes in and it has to pass through the IPS to get to the network, and the IPS can therefore block it if it detects it as bad. All right, so the simplest and oldest kind is pattern matching, like Snort, where it just has a list of bad patterns, and when it matches those bad patterns, it flags it or blocks it. The problem with that, of course, is any kind of mutation in the attack can evade that. So then you can try to detect behavior, like types of packets that shouldn't exist, like something with both the SYN and the FIN flag, or anomaly detection, where you measure a baseline and then you flag anything that comes above the baseline. SIEM systems are the modern ones, like Splunk is the most famous one. This is a system that will collect data from many sources, typically logs from your web server, your firewall, your IDS, your routers, everything. It accumulates all the log data into one place, and then you can scan it all in this place for violations and run queries to hunt for threats and such. So another thing recommended these days is continuous monitoring. There was an old system where you'd examine your systems every 3 years to see if they were in compliance. Continuous compliance monitoring is now expected, where you just make sure that your security policy is being obeyed to some extent by continuous monitoring of the network for things like patches and such. Data loss prevention is the opposite. This watches the data leaving your network to see if things that should not be leaving are leaving, like your sensitive data. This is what Google did in 2010. China hacked everybody for about 5 years, and most of them did not detect it, but when they hacked Google, Google's DLP systems detected their data leaving and going to China, and that's how they got caught. So endpoint security is like antivirus, although they have these suites with many controls that you put on your endpoints, and it tries to prevent them from getting owned, because that's usually how it all starts, because your endpoint devices, people open email and surf the web and click on links and such. So antivirus is the famous defense. It's much less effective than it used to be. It's estimated to stop only 2% of the attacks these days. People still recommend it as of some use to stop the lowest level attackers, but it's quite weak. And that's because it works on blacklisting. Your antivirus tries to list all the evil things in the world and block them all with this ever-growing database. A much safer technique, much more effective technique, is whitelisting, where you list all the good software you should be running and you don't let anything that's not recognized as good run. So it might use the file name or the hash of the file or a signature to recognize good files and let them run. In general, this is not very popular because it turns out to be a big administrative burden to keep the whitelist up to date, but I think it's coming. All right, and so there used to be in Windows XP, you could plug in a thumb drive and it would immediately run things on files on the drive, or you put in a CD and it would immediately run the files on there. This is typically not recommended anymore, and it's disabled in modern versions of operating systems because that's, of course, too dangerous. Yeah, that's the problem with whitelisting. It's management intensive. For encrypted data, how would you be able to monitor many systems? Would you need the keys for each system? Well, for an SIEM system, you're looking at log data. If you have encrypted data, you can't do much with it, which is why, for example, enterprises typically man-in-the-middle HTTPS connections and decrypt them in a proxy and then re-encrypt them because they do not let you make any encrypted channels out like VPNs. There's only one official company VPN, and they can man in the middle of that one and decrypt it. For DLP, yeah, the same thing's true. For data going in or out, you wouldn't let it be encrypted. So apparently, I think they caught the Chinese data just by the quantity of data and the location. I don't think they could see inside it. But what they saw was, here is this data going out to a Chinese server that is not one of our company servers. So who is sending data to this company server? I think that's the way I heard it described. So I'm glad you asked the question. Sure. All right, and so you have disk encryption. The best thing is full disk encryption. There used to be things that would just encrypt one folder, and it rapidly turned out that that's not safe enough because even if you encrypt your home folder, there are temporary files created in other parts of the disk as you use products like Microsoft Office that have extra copies of what you're opening, so it's not safe enough unless you just encrypt the whole drive. And that's what BitLocker does, and Apple's File Vault, and the TrueCrypt product. Anyway, encrypting the whole disk is recommended, and if you do that, and the power is off, then if you lose your laptop in the airport, you do not need to report that as a data breach, because it is considered impossible to recover the data on there. There are some very exotic ways that can sometimes break through full disk encryption, but it's next to impossible. Honeypots are systems that are deliberately vulnerable to attract attackers, and they may have fake data. And so the point of these things is so you have a chance to catch the attackers before they get further, or perhaps you're an antivirus company that wants to get malware samples or something, and honeynets are simulated networks of honeypots. All right, and okay, so to manage your assets, one thing is your configuration management. You have things like routers and switches and firewalls and servers, and you should have a standard recommended configuration where you adjust the settings on them, change the default password, turn off the unnecessary services, and so on. And that should be documented. So when you buy a new piece of equipment, you don't just plug it into your network, you first harden it to your official company standards before you connect it. And that's your configuration management. And so you can have a baseline where you capture the security configuration and record it, and then compare other devices to the recommended configuration or make sure that they are all up to the recommended configuration. And then there's patch management, which is a huge problem because, as we all know, patches are very dangerous. Microsoft patches and Linux patches and everybody's patches have a chance of breaking the system, and you don't want that happening at work. And yet if you don't patch promptly, then you're open to attacks. So there's a problem here where you have to have some sort of test network and test patches to make sure they're not going to break anything, and then deploy them as quickly as possible. And that's something many companies struggle with. But you typically have to have a patch management system. You don't just let end users decide when to patch an endpoint. You push the patches from the domain controller when your patch management team has decided it is time to deploy that patch. Vulnerability management, you'll be running scans of some sort to find vulnerabilities and then mediating them, running some scanner like Nessus or an expensive commercial one to see if you have missing patches or known defects. And you can remediate those vulnerabilities. Your patch scanner will tell you how to do that. But there are vulnerabilities that you cannot patch, and those are the 0 days, which means they are vulnerabilities that nobody knows yet, so nobody can write the bug report or the patch, and your only defense there is generic defenses like administrative controls or layers of defenses. Change management is the same thing. You have a change control board that considers if you want to change something, like move to the next version of software or add another wireless access point or something. You have a change management board that considers this change and decides whether it's good or bad. You can't just casually do it, so you identify you want to change something, you propose it, then you assess the risk and get approval from the board, then you test it, schedule it, notify everybody involved that you're changing something, implement it, and then check the results to see if you did break something or mess something up. And that's the correct process for a change that will affect how things work in your company. All right, let's see the Kahoot. And it is a favorite, 125B. There we go. Okay, so that's ready. People still coming in, okay? Okay, I guess we're ready. All right, what defense prevents PII from leaving the network? That's data loss prevention. Good, the most popular answer. All right, what defense correlates data from many sources? That's your SIEM system. Good. Hear people call it a SIM anyway. All right, what system blocks all unrecognized software? That's whitelisting. You have to be on the list to be approved. All right, and what defense compares traffic to a baseline of normal activity? All right, that's anomaly detection. Find anything that is sufficiently far from normal. All right. Okay, so continuity of operations. This is considerations of how you keep the system going when things go wrong. A service level agreement is a deal you make with another company or another branch of your own company saying what you are purchasing, recommending, specifying what they promise to deliver, like 99.9% uptime or something like that. So fault tolerance is what you want. Everything is going to break. When something breaks, that's a fault. But if the users might still receive service if your system is fault tolerant, it's only a failure if the users no longer receive service. So if you have a fault tolerant system, like 2 servers, and one breaks but the other one takes over to load, then you've had a fault but not a failure, and that's fault tolerance. So backup is another system. This is for recovery after a disaster. So a full backup is where you copy all the data. An incremental backup is where you get the data that has changed since the last backup. So you might need a whole series of tapes to recover the whole situation. Focus on restoration of service, And a differential backup is where the data changed since the last full backup, so it would always take 2 tapes to recover. The last full backup and the latest differential tape. Anyway, all right. Those are really old systems for backups. RAIDs are an availability solution, not a backup solution. You have multiple disk platters so that you'll have extra copies that can take over when one disk fails. And so RAID mirroring is where you have 2 copies of the data, so you pay for twice as much hard disk space and you have another entire disk ready to go if one fails. Striping is where you do not get fault tolerance. You put a little data on this platter and the next platter and the next platter just so you can read and write faster to get more performance without fault tolerance. Parity is where you do striping, but some of those stripes of data are calculated from the rest and represent redundant information so that if one or more platters fail, you can reconstruct that data from the parity information on the other platters. So RAID 0, no fault tolerance. RAID 1 is mirrored. And RAID 3 and RAID 5 are the common ones where you have distributed parity. Could you dwell on striping? Sure, striping is pretty easy. You write like 64K on the first platter and the next 64K on the next platter, and next 64K on the next platter. And if you have, say, 3 platters, then the point is you can write 3 times as fast and read 3 times as fast. That's all the idea. It's because your file is spread in little chunks across all the platters. That's the point of this stuff. It means that it's faster, but it also means if any one of those platters fails, you lose your data. Here, you write extra copies of the data. Here, you write a complete extra copy, so you have twice as much disk space used. In a RAID 3 to RAID 5, you have less extra cost, like maybe 1/5 extra, but you can still survive when one platter fails. Microsoft has said for years that they think this is all ridiculous, and we should switch to their system, which is ReFS, Resilient File System or something like that, where they do it on one disk. They have little clusters and they make extra copies on the same disk because they say nowadays you have like a 2 terabyte disk, you get one read error on it, then you're going to throw the whole disk away. That doesn't make any sense. So anyway, but a lot of people still use these RAIDs. So you can also make more complicated arrays where you have a RAID 5 and another RAID 5 mirroring and that sort of thing. RAID 1 plus 0 where you have stripes and then you mirror the stripes. And you can have big complicated disk arrays. And that's what you get if you use things like Dropbox. They have big arrays of disks at the other end of that. All right, so then not only are your disks going to have to be redundant in some way, but your power supplies, network cards, servers themselves. So one system is where you have a failover cluster where there's one server, for example, or something, and then another one just sitting there but not in use. And there's a heartbeat going across, and when the first one fails, it'll stop putting out heartbeats, hopefully, and the next one will take over. That's failover. That's called active-passive. The other kind that's a little more complicated to set up, but kind of makes more sense for management, is active-active, where they're both running and both in use all the time, so you get higher performance, and when one fails, you continue to serve the customer with degraded performance. That seems a little less wasteful than having one sitting there all the time not being used. Anyway, all right, and then you've got the management policies to watch over this. So business continuity planning is the plan of how you are going to have your business survive some kind of disaster. A lot of small businesses have no business continuity plan, like little mom and pop restaurants. If the building burns down, they just give up and they're out of business. And that's one way to go, but you can't really play with the big companies that way. Nobody will put up with that kind of sloppy management. You have to have good plans. If you're going to have business partners with large corporations or government, they expect you to tolerate disasters. So this is how you plan to carry on your long-term plan to survive a disaster of some kind. And there are little plans inside the business continuity plan, like the disaster recovery plan. And the disaster recovery plan is a tactical plan to deal with a specific problem, like malware or a fire or a flood. And so you got a whole series of these things. Is your business continuity plan, and in here you've got a disaster recovery plan and your business resumption plan, crisis communications, occupant emergency to protect the people, continuity of operations, and that's for your business, cyber incident and continuity of support plan, and so on. You got all these little plans inside there to make your business continuity plan work. So they all depend largely on a maximum tolerable downtime. You say, how long could you do without a building, without a server? Yes, cost is a big factor in all of it. That's why you start here figuring out how long could we do without this, and therefore how much money should we spend making some kind of alternative that can come up faster. So you can sort them by cause: natural, human, environmental. That's one way to do it. So you got natural disasters, you got human attacks of various kinds, you have errors, which is the number one problem, of course. Most of the problems are caused by mistakes of your own staff rather than outside attackers. And then, of course, environmental issues. So here's examples: earthquakes, strikes, denial of service attacks, errors from your people, electrical fires, and so on. And so the most common one, as I mentioned, is errors and omissions. When your own staff makes a mistake, that is the most likely reason why something will go down, of course, because they have the passwords, they're changing the hardware, and of course they make mistakes sometimes, and that's generally a whole lot more likely than any outside attacker getting in. All right, so if you don't have proper temperature and humidity in your server rooms, of course, then the servers will fail more often, and you got to have backup power and backup air conditioning and uninterruptible power supplies and generators for when the power fails on the power grid. And then you got these outside disasters like this pandemic, war, terrorism, sabotage. Those are issues that affect all or part of your company. And when these disasters happen, you may no longer be able to call people on the phone or reach them over the internet or so on, so your communications may be a problem. So here's the disaster recovery process. These 5 steps are here. So respond is when you initially decide how bad is the damage, what buildings are safe, how much is affected, and we will decide whether to call this a disaster and implement the disaster recovery plan, or whether it's not that big a deal and we'll just have some normal maintenance. Then you activate your team after deciding you've really got a disaster. Then you figure out some way to communicate with all your people, even though the phones might be down. And then you assess what's going on. How big is the damage? What do we need to do? What needs to be replaced? Do we need to move the staff to an alternate location? And so on. And here you consider the maximum tolerable downtime of the various things that are not working. And of course, the number one issue is the safety of the personnel. And then you have reconstitution, where you reconstruct your business processes, either at the primary or secondary site, salvage the equipment at the damaged site and try to get things back to normal. All right, so we got another Kahoot, which is 125.7c. All right, I got to go to favorites. There it is, 125.7c. All right, looks like we got everybody. Okay, so what disk array lacks fault tolerance? That's RAID 0, good. What's the most common source of a disruption? Yep, your own staff making mistakes. I remember about 10 years ago, Amazon went down for 4 days, and they eventually admitted it was because they turned on a new load balancing system that did the opposite of what it was supposed to, and redirected all the traffic to the high load device instead of the low load device and brought everything down. The kind of thing happens all the time. All right, so what kind of server cluster uses all the servers all the time? Okay, that's load balancing. Good. All right, so what plan deals with a specific disruption, like a fire? Okay, that's the disaster recovery plan. All right. Okay. Okay. All right. All right. So, to develop your plan, you've got to start the project, decide what part of the company it covers, and then perform these steps, which we'll go through. So you initiate the project, you decide your planning. These are, again, all the steps we're going to pass through. So you show it here in general. You develop the policy. You have to have C-level managers do this, the policy statement. Then you conduct the business impact analysis to decide how important all the different parts of your company are. Then you identify the controls, develop recovery strategies, and make plans. And then you go down here and develop the IT plan. You test, train your people, and run exercises. And then you have to keep updating and maintaining the plan because, of course, as conditions change and your business changes, the plan has to change. So, and there's all kinds of different people involved in all these different steps. So you must be supported by C-level management. This is a big issue in all CISSP training, is that you're wasting your time to do any kind of security improvement if you don't have support from upper management, because all these security improvements cost money and require time and resources, and you must have a champion at the top who supports what you're doing, or you should just forget it. So, and of course, this may improve your company efficiency even if no disaster occurs. You're becoming more organized. But there certainly will be short-term costs of setting up all these plans and training and such. So you got a project manager. This is the person to make sure that the plan is created and tested. And the main thing they have to be is a manager. It's not a technical position. They have to have credibility and authority and be good at negotiating with people. So they are the manager to organize the teams. So you build your team, and you have to have stakeholders from all the main parts of your business so you don't make a plan that neglects some important part of the business that would have something to say about you're not bothering to repair that thing until later or something. Then you decide what the scope is. This is a big issue. If you don't scope it correctly, you'll waste your money trying to protect too much of the company or neglect to protect some part that must be there. All right, and then you list your assets and who uses them and what they support, and therefore how much it would harm your business if they were out. So that's your business impact analysis, and the goal is to determine how long you can tolerate downtime. So, of course, if you are Google, you can't stand to have your web server down at all because that's your whole business. If you're City College, you probably could be okay to have the web server down for a week, except for the online classes right now. But back before the pandemic, most of our classes are face-to-face, and having the website down really wasn't a crucial thing for our business. And that's the thing. You make these plans, and you define your critical assets, and then do a risk analysis of those. And so here's risk analysis for various risks. The server might be unlocked, and so you can fix that by putting in locks. If your software is out of date, you got to put on updates. If you have no firewall, then you can solve that various ways. The modern solution is probably to just move it to managed hosting. That's what most people do for email now. They don't run their own Exchange server. They just move to Office 365, and then that outsources that problem. Anyway, you determine your maximum tolerable downtime. There's a few ways to measure it. Recovery point objective is how much data you recover, so how often you make backups. Recovery time objective is how long it takes to perform the recovery, and recovery work time is the time it takes to finish preparing a system after the recovery from backup. So that's your maximum tolerable downtime, is the sum of these two. These are the two things that must happen if you're going to restore, say, a server. You have to play your tapes, and then you have to do whatever additional work is required to bring it back up to functional state, and that's your make sure that is not more than your maximum tolerable downtime. And then there's how often you expect things to fail. Mean time between failures is just how often things are expected to break. Hard drives and things come with this rating. Mean time to repair is another way to measure it. And you've got requirements for environment and such to that affect this. And supply chain management is all the rage now because of the SolarWinds attack. Your suppliers may be down. Right now everybody is in trouble because there's a lack of chips and so on. There's a lack of pretty much everything because of the Suez Canal and the container ships being held up. So you may have to consider that the stuff you want to buy, like replacement parts, is not as available as you would like it to be. And you may have to consider alternatives to telecommunication, like satellite phones and such, if you're going to have something like a hurricane that wipes out all the normal phone lines. And everything else might be gone too, your power, your water, your gas, another thing to consider. So here's the general site recovery. If you have no plan, then you have no cost but no availability when it goes down. And the cheapest is a cold site. Warm, hot, and redundant sites are the more expensive and better ways to recover. How robust are satellite phones? It's a good question, and I don't really know. I don't know if I've heard the lack of chips was because of COVID, that they couldn't manufacture them, but of course Bitcoin mining is certainly consuming some of them. I don't know if that's the main cause. Anyway, so redundant site means it's like you've got one already ready to go, like Google. Google's got thousands of servers, and they're all contributing to your Google search. So they're all completely updated. They're already running. So if one server goes down, other servers are just ready to go. Other locations are just ready to go. Hot site is ready, but you might have to load something from a backup tape or something. Your warm site takes a few days to bring up, and a cold site means you actually own the building, and it has like power and internet, but it doesn't have servers in there. So it takes weeks to bring up. Yeah, Ethereum's proof of stake would seek to alleviate the consumption of power, but it wouldn't really do anything about the consumption of chips, I think, although I guess it might. Anyway, but proof of stake is not working yet. There's serious problems with that. Anyway, so one option you can have is a reciprocal agreement with another company where you make, you agree that if my stuff is destroyed, I will borrow your servers for a while and be a guest in your data center, and you offer me the same. That's one way to get a sort of warm site. And then there's mobile sites. I've seen these. AT&T has them. They can drive a bunch of trucks into a vacant lot and build a cell phone station. They've got everything, power and internet and satellite connections and everything in trucks. And you can also outsource these things to other companies that will provide business continuity and disaster recovery systems for you. So you got a lot of these plans: your business continuity plan, business resumption plan, continuity operations plan, which is a business type plan, and here's the continuity support plan for the IT contingencies, communication plan, your incident response plan to deal with a cyber attack, a disaster recovery plan for specific disasters, and the occupant emergency plan of how you're going to protect the people if something like the building is on fire and you have to get them out of there, and so on. So that's what you see here. All right. We've been through this. So you might have call trees or automated call trees to communicate with people, and you might have copies of your vital records off-site. And you might have executive succession planning. I remember we just had Biden's State of the Union, and this was the first one where they didn't have a designated survivor that was not there in case somebody would bomb the building, because of COVID there weren't very many executives in the building. But in the past they always had one person from the cabinet who was specifically not there, so they didn't have the whole cabinet in one building at one time to be in a temptation to our attacks. Yeah, okay, it's various people. Yeah, various issues. Good, somebody's got a link there explaining the reasons why we have the chip shortage. Yeah. All right, so let's take a look at a Kahoot. And I need 125.7D. It looks like that's it. I know the automobiles are also unable to manufacture as many as they want because of lack of chips. Everything is getting messed up. I think ultimately it came from COVID, but a lot of related issues work together to make the problem. Yeah, that's right. Good. I see a lot of good reasons in the chat there. Okay, let's try these. All right, so what's the maximum time needed to recover the system? That's the recovery time objective. All right. This is the mean time to repair. That's not the same thing. All right. All right, which option takes about an hour to implement? That's a hot site. Good. All right, which process uses somebody else's data center? All right, that's a reciprocal agreement. Good. And what plan protects humans? That's it, the occupant emergency plan.